session, and you'll see a little disclaimer pop up at the top saying that we're recording this evening, and we'll be able to post this at the end. I will take it a little bit to download, and then we'll be ready to go. And then I'm going to mute everyone right now, and then Terry, you can unmute yourself. Tonight, we're going to be looking at the first 72 hours of a disaster relief operation, and we're just going to kind of walk you through some ideas to think about as we think about operations management and some of the decisions that have to be made in those first 72 hours. So I'm going to mute everyone, and then Terry, you can unmute yourself. You can go ahead, Terry.
Right, I couldn't get it to unmute on the screen. Okay, so anybody who's still got their video on, Cheryl Condon, you can turn it off because it's just using up bandwidth. So good evening, everyone. My name is Terry Hunter. I'm a volunteer with the Silicon Valley chapter of the American Red Cross. And Kirsten and I are going to walk you through some thoughts about what goes on in the first 72 hours. And it's really, how is this sausage made? Before getting into the content, I wanted to thank a number of people who I've listed on this slide who gave great inputs. So just as a bit of background, I've been a volunteer with the Red Cross for about 5, maybe going on 6 years now. And I have been involved in a number of DRs, but only up to about a level 4 DR. So I'm not hugely experienced. So I turned to these experts, which included Chris Boyle, Eddie Gilbert, Ian Dyer, Jen Short, John Ruiz, who's my RDO, Carl Matsky, Kirsten, of course, Luke Beckman, and Ty Franklin. So we got great input from them. What we're going to go through tonight is not aimed at you super experienced people. And I see some of the names here are very experienced in operating in high-level DRs. But since the goal of the Institute is to help people who are working towards operations management positions, we've kind of taken the view of this is a high level 3, level 4 type of DR. Put that in your mind at least. But you know, don't forget that the disaster response starts with just a DAT call. So even a level 2 can demand a certain amount of structure and a certain amount of thinking about the things we'll talk about tonight. But once you get beyond the level 3 or level 4, in non-COVID times, national takes over running it, and you get a lot more help and advice. So we really want to focus on that sort of middle ground where folks like us, like me, may wake up one day and suddenly find that you're running a wildfire response or a flood response. I've run a level 4 flood response in the past. So we're definitely going to be talking about what happens when we get into gray skies. And you are going to get an emergency call. So your first reaction should be, please don't panic. It's a question of staying calm and thinking about the things that need to be done. So what we're going to go through are talking about some of the priorities that need to be thought about early on in the setup and operation of the DR. We'll look quickly at the operational phases. We'll talk about the guiding principles. Some of you I see on the call have taken ConOps 3 that I've taught, so you should recognize that a bit. We'll talk about what happens in the first 24 hours, how to set up the DRO organization and the table of organization, the TO. And then we're going to take the perspective of different roles in the operational command structure. So we'll talk about the DRO director, getting this thing started up, what should be the focus on initial objectives, how to organize a headquarters, how to think about planning and communication very, very early on. And then we'll go through section by section and talk about what should be top of mind for the assistant directors, the AD of operations, the AD of information and planning, the AD of workforce, AD of logistics, AD of external relations, and AD of finance. And that's where I've had all of that great input from the people that I thanked on the earlier slide. And then at the end, we'll wrap up and hopefully be able to open for questions. Now, you're all experienced Teams users, so if you do have something urgent that you need to ask, pop it in the chat. We'll try and keep an eye on that. So what are the top priorities? What should we be focused on before anything else? Does anyone want to pop an answer in the chat? Safety, I love it. Anybody else? So anyone who participated in the calls that Trevor and Brad have had in the last few weeks, they've mentioned this a number of times. And the two top priorities are safety and delivering service to clients. And yes, so meeting urgent needs. Thank you, Tricia, for that. So these are the two key things, and they're the first things to be thinking about. Safety is always at the top priority, safety of our workforce and obviously safety of our clients. And then thinking about speed to market, that's getting initial relief to the clients as quickly as possible. And then speed to scale, how do we scale up the operation to match the size of what we're dealing with? So as we go through this, we're not going to try and give you technical or functional training, but really just a picture of what should perhaps be top of mind for each of the members of the operational command team. And hopefully what you'll see in this is some of the interdependencies that there are. So I'm sure many of you are very familiar with your own, I'll call it silo, but I don't mean it in a pejorative way, but maybe don't see what's driving some of the other sections of the operation and why they come and ask you lots of questions. So we're hoping that this will give you a better overview of that. So these are the DRO operational phases. Hopefully everybody's familiar with these. The service delivery level, obviously, on the left-hand axis, it rises very quickly in the initiating phase as we scale up to meet whatever the demand is, the projected or actual need. Then the DRO will stabilize and maybe even start to scale down to a sustainment level. And then eventually it will move into a demobilization phase. So our focus today is going to be on this initiating phase, the first 72 hours. And if you hang in for the rest of this week, you're going to get a pretty good view of what happens as we move into the stabilization phase, particularly in terms of the planning that's necessary there, the service delivery planning. And then I think later in the week, Al Malamo, my good friend, is going to talk about the demobilization phase. An often underestimated complex phase of any operation. So we're going to focus on the first 72 hours. So here are our guiding principles. And you can see mission, care and safety of the workforce, inclusive and client-centered service delivery right at the top of the list, engaged partners, good hello, good goodbye. In almost every one of the section summaries that we'll give you, you can probably see a lot of areas where the good hello is going to be really, really important. Getting to yes, data-driven decision making. Now, data-driven decision making can only happen if we get data. So that's another thing that we'll talk about. Kirsten, who's an expert on that, we'll talk a little bit about that later on. And then finally, we are in a way running a business. We need to be good stewards of the donor dollars and resources, and we need to make sure at some point that we actually get the income to cover the cost of what we're doing. So after that emergency call, in the first 24 hours, we're going to talk about a number of items that are in this list. Very early on, establishing a DRO structure and building a team. Establishing priorities and establishing objectives very early on. Everybody needs to know what it is they're aiming to do on that first day. We need to set up an HQ. Up until a few months ago, that would have been on scene. Now it's virtual. We need to set up effective communication paths, both formal and informal communication. Meeting schedules, really, really important. Making sure that we're getting good intel, so good situational awareness. Get the information and planning activity up and running very quickly. We'll talk about the 5 constituents that we need to bear in mind as we determine priorities and make decisions. We need to have a pretty quick view of our inventories, both human and material and technology. So we'll talk both about the workforce section and the logistics section later on, and they focus very much on this. Very early on, we need to figure out what it is the clients really need. And by the end of the 72 hours, we should be at the point of beginning to prepare what's called the initial planning tool. And we won't go into that in any detail tonight because Karl Matzke is going to talk about that tomorrow and Wednesday. So the first 24 hours, there's a lot to do. Responders will focus on responding. So if there is a wildfire, and somebody mentioned the Kincade fire, which was a sudden and big one last year, but we've had them, we get wildfires every year, we get floods. If it's a no notice event, most of our volunteers and staff will be focusing on service delivery to the clients. But that needs a structure. It needs a framework very, very quickly. And so when you move from being an operator working on service delivery and you move into the command structure, you're an AD or you're a job director, your job now is to provide leadership and not to have your sleeves rolled up and be out in the parking lot unloading the earth. Somebody else needs to do that because you need to be leading. So DRO leaders must establish structure very quickly and must build the team that's going to then deliver a well-run operation. So you need to get folks thinking operational state. And I love this quote, which comes from Chris Boyle. You're no longer the deputy administrator of paperclips. You're now the section chief of pencils. And that's a very different transition to make from being an administrator or an operator of some kind and becoming a manager. It's also very important that in building this structure, we get our teams to understand that they need to get in their lane and stay in their lane and respect the chain of command. But when we think about getting in lane and staying in lane, it's really important that everybody also works on helping the others be successful in theirs. And once again, as we go through these top of mind issues for the different sections, you'll see that almost no section can get its job done without asking for things from another. So helping other people be successful in their lane is very, very important. It's also super important that the team very quickly starts to delegate the work. And that's driven by span of control very often. So you must make sure that you set effective span of control. And as an AD or as a DRO director, you need to be keeping an eye on this all of the time to make sure that your team you don't have team members who suddenly have a big stretch of span of control and basically can no longer manage the function. So, it's the sort of optimum is somewhere between 4 and 7, depending on the complexity of the situation. But once somebody has more than 7 people reporting to them, we really need to be thinking about splitting that job in 2. And then last on this slide, but perhaps the most important thing is communicate, communicate, communicate. People need to know what's going on. People need to know what their job is. People need to know who their boss is. People need to know who they're working with. People need to know where they're going. There are a lot of things people need to know. So communication is super, super important. So establish and publish the table of organization and a contact roster as early as possible. Kirsten pointed out to me that quite often the table of organization is published, but it doesn't have any phone numbers on it, or it doesn't have any email addresses on it. Anything that gets published needs to be useful to the people who are reading it. So just knowing who the DRO director is or who the AD of logistics is isn't a lot of help if you don't know how to get hold of them. So the TO and contact roster needs to be published as early as possible. And bear in mind that our command system, so our concept of operations, is designed to expand and contract. So it's not going to be cast in stone. That first day's TO may change by the second day, depending on how the operation is sizing, how it's growing, or maybe it isn't growing as fast as we expected. Any number of things can affect it. But what is really key is to make sure there is always a TO with contact roster available, and anybody who needs to know what the latest one is can see it. It's also important to follow the structure in ConOps 3. So no made up positions. Nobody should be saying I'm what today. They should be able to find themselves on the organization, in the organization structure, on the organization chart. As I already mentioned, it's very important to make sure all of the key team members know their chain of command. This goes all the way from the top to the bottom. And as I said, manageable span of control is a key driver as you think about and design your TO. And that may be the TO at the high level for the command structure. It may be the TOs within each of the sections. Now, we aren't going to go into teaching about COVID-19 tonight, although I'm sure it's going to come up a few times. The DRO operational structure is quite significantly modified under COVID-19. And I hope everybody who's on this call has heard of the DCS COVID-19 Compendium, which is a document that was published about 2.5 weeks ago that has brought into one publication most of the guidance that we have for operating under COVID-19. There's a whole section on ConOps in COVID-19 starting on page 56. So I recommend all of you to read it and read it soon, because you never know when you might have to operate under this. Lou Miller, well done. I'm glad you read it. So, straight out of ConOps, this is the operational command structure. And it's another important thing is to know what are the sections and what are the titles of the people who run them. And we're becoming much more aligned with ICS, for those of you who are familiar with it. So under command, which is your DRO director, there are 6 sections, each one run by an assistant director. So there's operations, there's an AD of operations, an AD of information and planning, AD of logistics, AD of workforce, AD of finance, AD of external relations. And as the ConOps model shows, if you don't need all of those sections, then, or you don't need somebody to manage each of those sections, let me rephrase that, then that the position that doesn't have somebody in it defaults to the next highest one. So in a small DR, the job director may also be effectively filling the finance position or the external relations position. It's unlikely, but unless there's somebody in that job, it defaults to the next higher level. These are the functional levels and titles. These are on page 39 in ConOps, so I'm not going to go through them in a lot of detail. Thank you, Kirsten, for posting that. But the command level is the DRO director, the Red Cross coordinating officer, that's what that acronym is, the chief of staff and the deputy DRO director. All of these positions may or may not be present depending on the size of the DR. The next level is the section level, which is the ADs that I showed on the previous slide. And then at the group level, at the headquarters, it's a chief. The activity level, it's a manager. At the unit level, it's a coordinator. And at the site level, it's a liaison or a site supervisor. And this is for the DRO headquarters. On the right-hand side of the chart are the equivalent titles for people in the districts. So the district will have a district director who's the section head in the district. And for anyone who's followed ConOps 3, that when I've taught it, they will know immediately who that person reports to. And if they don't, they've forgotten, you're fired. Okay, so there's a wonderful appendix, and Kirsten has just posted a link, or at least a reference to this. And I chose one of the busiest eye charts in it to show you. But for each of the sections that we mentioned, or that I mentioned, there is a position assignment chart that shows you exactly how at the headquarters or in a district, the structure is set up and how the various levels report to each other. So in every one of these positions, it says who's assigned, what's the position assignment title, and who do they report to. And it also indicates what gaps are required to fill those positions. And in the event that a position is not filled, then the person reports to the next one up. So you can find all of these in the appendices to ConOps. And by the way, if you download the ConOps, I've forgotten what it's called, just pick it up off the floor, Concept of Operations, Program Essentials, you won't get these charts. They're separately available through another link on the Exchange as the position assignment charts, and it's really important that you have them. Okay, so we talked about the TO. And here, again, straight out of ConOps, is the level 3 table of organization. And so you can see the jobs that we're going to talk about tonight, the DRO director and the ADs of the 6 sections. And if you look below, you can see where some of the deputy ADs and other people fit in, depending on the size of the operation. But let's talk about these 7 positions. First of all, the DRO director. So this is the commander of the operation, the super boss. What should be top of mind for the DRO director? Well, we've already gone through this. Care and safety of the workforce. Client service. What are the basic needs that are currently unmet? And there are 5 initial actions that we should be thinking about. Most of you should know these or do know these: sheltering, feeding, DA, disaster assessment, aligning with government, so making sure that we have coverage in EOCs, and supporting external relations, so public affairs and fundraising. What are the top priorities? Well, first of all, as I've already said, making sure that we have filled the key positions in the table of organization. So we need to make sure that activities involving those 5 initial actions are stood up and staffed very quickly: sheltering, feeding, reporting, EOCs, and fundraising. Now, you might be surprised to see fundraising coming here early on, but remember, we need to run this like a business, and we need to raise money. So providing information to the fundraising team, which is usually run out of the local organization, the region in which the disaster has occurred, giving them information, telling them the story is very key to pulling at heartstrings and purse strings. I'd like to thank Ian Dyer for that line. I think it really explains it very quickly. So when you see the public affairs folks out there making the little videos, or when they come and ask you what's going on, or if you come across a great story that can be of interest to the public, make sure we do tell that story, because it's very, very important. Next top priority is planning assumptions. What needs exist and what resources do we have to fulfill them, or what resources do we need to get to fill them? Then we need to make sure we get resource requests in. So that includes assessing the local capacity, figuring out what's the likely duration of the event and the ability to sustain it. And then we need to look at sustainment, which is support and maintenance. So we need to set up a headquarters, or identify the requirements for one, or identify the requirements for a new one if we have to move. We also need to work very, very early on workforce care, so staff lodging considerations and things of that nature. So we need to establish objectives. And in the first 24 hours, the easiest way is to try and come up with one objective for each client-facing priority. So here are some examples. Feeding, it's client-facing priority. So a good objective would be establish kitchens at 123 Main Street with a capacity of 500 meals per day. It's very specific about what, where, and when, and how much. Sheltering, a good example. Open and operate 5 shelters. Location in the work locations section, and ensure full staff by 8 a.m. tomorrow. DA and reporting. Coordinate DA activities with local government officials and begin home assessments by noon tomorrow. Public affairs and fundraising. It's not client facing at this point, but there may be messaging that needs to go out through public affairs. Where are the evacuation centers located? Where are the shelters located? Where are the customer service operations going to be set up? So it's very important they're in the loop and know what's going on. And government. So we need to make sure we have EOC coverage. It's very, very important to get that done early on. So if it's not done, another objective might be identify coverage at all EOCs by close of business, first day. So one thing you may notice is that these are all SMART goals. And if you're the DRO director, or for that matter, if you're anyone in the leadership, you should be trying to develop SMART goals and hold yourself accountable to them. So in the interests of time, I'm not going to ask what SMART stands for, but I'm going to tell you. S is for specific, M is for measurable, A is for achievable, and that should be within the operational period. R is for relevant, and T is timely. So you can probably see when you look at these examples that they all have those elements in them. Okay, so these are the 5 constituents that I mentioned earlier that need to be considered. These constituent groups need to be considered when making decisions. So these include the clients, the public, particularly in the area where the disaster has occurred. Maybe people are not affected, but are in that area. Our donors, our partner organizations, very, very important, and our Red Cross organization. So meeting all of the client needs is a great idea, but not at the risk of the partner relationships. Saving money is great, but not at the detriment of client service or worker safety. And sometimes DRO directors have to make choices and balance these things out, make wise choices. And normally the focus should be on today's priorities, the things that have been set as the priorities for today. Okay, so at this point, Kirsten, I'd like to hand it back to you.
All right, it's saying that you have to approve me taking control here, but if that doesn't work, I can bring it up myself.
It's okay, I stopped sharing. Did that work?
Oh, I'll put it up. 1 second. We got it.
Yep, it's working.
All right, everyone can see my screen? Good to go. All right, so we're going to walk through here. Oops, looks like someone else just clicked for us. So walking through here, you can see we're going to look at headquarters organization. So how do we set up headquarters? It's really important that headquarters is open when the DR is open. So if we're going to work on our operational O period, which is typically from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., we need to make sure that headquarters is open a little bit before 8 o'clock and even after 8 o'clock so that we can have our work take place. That could be online these days in our virtual headquarters, but we have hours that we work. And so one of the big pieces is the first daily call really has to take place at headquarters. And I know a lot of you have waited outside sometimes for headquarters to open up and be able to get started. But we need to be ready to go so it's comfortable, people can get there, and we can start doing our work. Now, we're using Microsoft Teams sites for this, and I'm going to post a job tool as soon as I get done talking about this here. But it's important for us to kind of understand, how does Teams work on a DRO? So at the end of our session tonight, if you have questions, you're like, I don't know how to use Teams on a DRO, I'll stay on the line at the end and kind of walk people through just some tips and hints about using Teams on a DRO. We have one that's set up that we can just kind of show you how to find the meetings and what your next steps are. We want to make sure that people have strict compliance to the call schedule. We don't want to be changing the daily schedule from day to day. Everyone needs to know that the calls take place at 8 o'clock or 1 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 6 o'clock, what that looks like, so that we can plan our day from there. And we really need to respect our team. If it's virtual, it's important that you respect those needs. It's not 24/7, that you can't just call at all hours of the night. If it's convenient to your work habits, we need to make sure that we're working our hours from place to place. Okay, looking at planning and communications framework with planning. Most of you have had the ICS classes, you've had ConOps, you've looked at the planning and with the planning P and the operational O. We'll look at those in just a second. One of the keys about this is that we have 4 meetings every day. They include our operational leadership meeting, our tactics meetings, working through our planning meeting, ops briefing. They can be optional for the all hands meeting, for the ops briefing. One of the keys though is that we don't want these meetings to last more than 30 minutes. They are purposeful, they are on point. We don't want to have a lot of other things going on. People have work to do. And so between the meetings is when you get all your work done, and then you go back to the meetings to figure out like what's our next step and where we're going from here. And so it's really important that we keep that in mind as we work through this. We're going to stick to the agenda. So if we've had operational planning fundamentals, there's actually an agenda for each meeting. You can go through, you can find the different agendas for that meetings. What does it look like in a tactics meeting? What does it look like in a planning meeting? Who needs to attend these meetings? And we also want to just really encourage you to use the director's brief. Like, everyone should know about the director's brief. It's incredibly important for us. Yes, we use it to brief the doc, but we also should be using it to brief our DR. And if the job briefs out in the morning briefing using that director's brief, it would be really easy for the people that are supervisors that heard that brief to be able to brief out their teams using that same brief. It's there, it should be used as much as possible. So we want to promote it. We want to make sure we share about it so that everyone knows about it. We want to also encourage you to join the daily meetings and calls. Now, you should join the daily meetings and calls if you're invited. I know on these different DROs where there's a phone number, people are like, oh, I'm going to call in and get involved in that. Well, yeah, you can call and listen in, but guess what? You have work to do too. And so make sure that you are supposed to be on the right calls, what calls you're supposed to go to, and then be fully engaged in those calls. Don't have that be the time where you are answering your emails, the time where you are trying to track down other things. I encourage people when we're in person to kind of leave their phones at their door, because they get distracted by the phones in a planning meeting or a tactics meeting sometimes. So we want to keep really focused, keep it short and to a point. So here's our planning P. If you look at the bottom here and you would start down at the event, you can see that the stem of that P is in the initial phase 1. We won't repeat that again after we get it started, but after that we go into what we call our planning O, where we have our operational leadership meeting, our operations and tactics meetings, our planning meeting leading to the operations briefing, and then we do it the next day. Now you can find this on page 8 in the operational planning standards, and you can see here in a little bit bigger forecast with our O's and where we go from there. So lots of different things that you'll see taking place as we move through and understand how our operational phases happen. Okay, and this just repeats every single day over and over again until the disaster relief operation is done once we get into that initial phase. So what's with all these meetings? So the operational leadership meeting typically is at 8 a.m. It's led by the job director, and the ADs review the objectives. They confirm if there's any changes that we're ready to go. They identify any additional objectives for tomorrow. Sometimes it's preparation for the sync call. Being on the West Coast, we typically have had our sync call in the past at 6 a.m. So normally it's a 5:30 in the morning or earlier update with people to get started. But in this case, hopefully we move to a more timely manner for us to be able to do those briefings with the doc. You'll see the tactics meetings at 1 p.m. The planning worksheets, the 215 planning worksheets are turned in before that meeting. They go to planning. The operations team leads it because it's talking about how they're going to do things. Tactics are what we're going to do, how we're going to accomplish it, what our next steps are. And the tactics meeting is kind of, I call it the horse trading meeting, because you literally are trading things back and forth to figure out, can we do this job? Do we have enough cleanup kits? Do we have enough water? Do we have enough things that we can distribute? And you work through those because we are trying to plan tomorrow's activities. And so in this tactics meeting, we have to make sure we have the goods that we need to be successful with that. The third meeting we have is the planning meeting, and the planning meeting is led by the assistant director of planning, and the job director attends it because at the end of the meeting, a formal piece to it, every person goes around the table and says, can you support the plan? And can we do this? And at the end, it's the job director's job to say, I support the plan. This is what we're going to do. And that sets everything in motion for the next day. In all reality, the IAP, the incident action plan, is completely done at that point, and people are ready to go out and get the work done. And then at 6 p.m. we come back. The job director leads a briefing. Planning puts together key points, helps them out if they need help finding out what's going on that day from our different reports that were due at 5:30 p.m. And we're ready to brief out at 6 p.m., talk about what we're going to be doing tomorrow, give shout outs to people, congratulate them for great work, use it as an all hands meeting as necessary, but it becomes one of those important meetings for us to kind of get the whole team on the right page so that we're ready to go the next morning and can start off with a lot of focus. So what's next? So the job director then has contingency planning, and we're going to look at that. So the job director and the information and planning need to be thinking ahead. We have things that come up. So operations and logistics, they're thinking about what do we have to handle right now? What's today's problems? What's today's priorities? The job director and information and planning, they're focused on like what's going on 2 to 3 days from now, and we'll look at that. We need to look at how many shelters do we really need? Are they active? Do we have evacuations that are going to take place? Are we going to get some weather? Are we going to have winds that are going to cause the fire to grow? So what's going on with that? And we'll develop high, medium, and low planning assumptions to help us work through that. And so when you look at that in our initial planning tool, and we'll walk through that tomorrow with Carl and David, we'll really be able to focus in on our next steps of how we do that. And then looking at that continuity of operations planning. What's our next step? How are we going to move forward as we go out in the next 72 hours time? And we always remember we're planning to demob at the same time that we are getting open. And so we want to know where things came from and that we don't put things back in a mess. So as we prepare transition plans, we're looking at shelters, we're finding where things came from, and we're documenting that as we go also. So lots of different pieces of the puzzle coming together. So we want to make sure that we maintain a full scope of activities, a full focus on the next steps. So you need to remember, like, what's our focused area? How do we avoid single track focus? I know for me, I'm a planning person, and I can get distracted by disaster assessment because disaster assessment is what I came along with in the Red Cross. And so I see things in disaster assessment that other people might not see, but I can't let that lead me astray. And so we have to keep focused on where we're going. We have to be challenged to branch out, try something new, do something that's unfamiliar. And in all reality, we have to trust our teammates. We have to trust the group to do the job. We verify it. You can't go out without thinking about what you're doing, but it's really important that we use that trust. And we use our operations management, our liaisons, the RDO, our division support in order to help us keep that focus moving forward. So what we're going to do at this point is we're going to kind of walk through the top things in the first 24 hours and then the next 48 hours for each of the sections. And we ask different section leaders to help us break these down and identify, like, what's the top priorities, what's your top 5. And you kind of think about our 5 initial actions. We break it down into our sections, which are our former groups in many ways, and say, what's the top priorities in the operations section? So these are the people that are going to do the tactics. They're the people that are working with recovery and working with response, and they're helping clients along the side. So the first priority is that everyone is safe. And you guys pointed that out before we ever got started today. The second one in the first 72 hours is we want to have a great hello. It's a good hello to all people impacted by disaster. We want to know that we're here, that we care about them, and that we want to help them. And so we're going to work through that good hello. We're going to look at how we rapidly stand up and staff the operations. So what are the immediate client needs? Is that sheltering? Is it feeding? Is it reunification? Is it dealing with all the things that have been donated through UDM? Or is it the distribution of emergency supplies? What does that look like? At the same time, we have our individual disaster care activities, looking at health services and mental health and spiritual care and disability integration, all those things that we need to be able to say, what do people need in order to help them move forward? We need to ensure that we don't lose track of reporting requirements. Now, I'm just going to point this out, and on almost every slide, you'll see that people say, don't lose track of your reporting requirements. They're really important to us because people depend on that information to help make decisions. So we have to do a really good job reporting as we work our way through the disaster relief operation. And we want to start thinking ahead quickly. What resources and abilities will you need to sustain this for 2 to 3 weeks? I mean, how many cycles is this disaster going to last for? We oftentimes think of these as waves. So we deploy people in 2 weeks, and you think, is this a 2-wave disaster relief operation? Is it a 3-wave disaster relief operation? Is it ginormous and we're talking about, 4 or 5 waves that are going to come along behind? And so we have to really start thinking about this ahead of time to make sure that we can properly staff it and move forward. So kind of operation sections. Now, information and planning, they have some different goals in mind. So one thing they have to do is they have to get the DRO team site set up, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but the team site's going to be really important for them. They're also going to have to establish their key activities, and in that's their FSI, their financial and statistical information, disaster assessment, information dissemination, and the situation unit, and getting those groups set up. It also means that we're going to start making sure that people have the account strings. So how do we pay for this stuff? And so we're going to get that account string out. Now remember, the account string comes out when the disaster relief operation is made an official DRO. You get an email from national headquarters that says, here's your DR number and your official name, and the next email you get is, here is your account string and here is who your finance person is as you're working through this. So the key is, though, it has to be shared. And so normally that goes into the IAP, but sometimes we also want to make sure we get it out in other ways too. So we're going to establish our battle rhythm of these planning meetings, and we're not going to move them around. We're going to keep them at the same time. and make sure that we find that it works well for us. And we're going to define our deliverables. Now, it's important to identify like what is a deliverable to all sections in a timely manner. So every day reports are due. So we have people that have to fill out a situation report. Well, the sit rep is filled out by people in the field and it's sent to their supervisors, and then their supervisors send it to their managers, and their managers send it to their assistant directors. And it's all broken down. The key is all of these deliverables have to be useful to people. So if I don't understand it, or I can't find it, or I don't understand what it's saying, it's not helpful to me as a worker. So if I'm reading the incident action plan, it has to be free of jargon so that in those work assignments, the 204s, I actually understand what I'm supposed to do and know who I'm supposed to respond to, who I report to, so that I can do a good job and do my position well. And that becomes important to us as we move forward. And we'll go from there. So there's lots of different things that are really important to us to move forward on, and we'll see that here. Now this graph has become kind of famous in our Red Cross classes as of late. I think it does a great job of really showing what information and planning is doing. So every single day we have people working on the incident action plan, and it's driving our daily planning cycle. And we also are looking ahead on our advanced operational planning and looking at 2 to 3, 4 days in advance. Where are we going? What do we have to get? What kind of bridge do we have to do in order to get to the next layer of our disaster response? In parallel to that, we are starting with the initial planning tool and really working through that. Now tomorrow, that's our focus in demystifying the 5266 is the initial planning tool and how that functions with the service delivery plan. And that's going to cover the entire disaster relief operation time period. And we'll be breaking these down. So like looking at the IPT, the incident planning tool and assumptions is like 24 hours. What do we know? How many groups are here? How much food do you need? How much staff do we need to have? How many homes are damaged? What's threatened? So we're going to be looking at quick information there. And we'll complete those. And then we'll have functional planning as needed. So as we get ready to transition, what does that look like? There's lots of different steps here that we'll walk through. And then I just remind people about the financial and statistical information. So FSI is so important to us because it gives out information, and we have to be good stewards of our donor dollars. And we have to be able to account for everything we spend. And so the big message that I want to share is please do your reports on time. Getting those reports in helps us tell our story. It helps it make sense. It helps us make sure that we are covering what we need to and have completed the disaster relief operation. It also helps us keep track of things. It's so difficult. I'm not sure if you guys have been on a disaster relief operation before, where you have to go back and reconstruct something that happened days, weeks, or even months earlier when you weren't even there. And so we have to do a really good job of keeping track of things. I know sometimes I have a hard time a few hours later reminding myself what exactly happened with that. So we have to do a good job with that. And the reason why it's so important is that our government partners use our financial statistical information as data. And it's not, if it's not on the report, it didn't happen in that county. And so as the county shares back what's going on, like how many meals we fed and what we're doing in that county, and it comes from that 5266 information from the group, we have to be able to tell our story. And that becomes really important to us as we move forward. So I'm just going to encourage you. You might not like the reports, but the reports help us so much with our success and being able to tell the story of what we're doing. The workforce section. So in the first 24 hours, we have to provide a safe procedure and shared implement of what's going on, like what's going on, what's our plan taking place. And we'll see from there. You're going to see the staff and the staff services unit really focus on recruiting and engaging local Red Cross volunteers and event-based volunteers first. Now, we've done this for a long time, try to get event-based volunteers, and maybe some of you worked on the volcano and you went over there and you said, well, there weren't any essays, it was all EBVs, event-based volunteers, and that's true because there was a huge expense to bring more people there, and so we wanted to train as many people on the ground. And now in this COVID environment, it becomes even more important for us to really focus in on who's on the ground, who's available to help. We don't want to move the entire workforce. So what can we do in order to help? And that's why our seasonal sheltering campaign right now to get people trained is so important to us. We want to capture and record workers' activities on the operation. So that work, who's leading, who's doing what holes do we have, what's the next step with that? We need to recruit and fill immediate staffing needs for the next 72 hours. And so that's going to go with local and region. And then if they have to escalate it to that next level of national disaster relief operation. And then really looking at where can we find more event-based volunteers, activating plans and putting that together. That's the first 24 hours. Now there's tons of things going on because you have people arriving and checking in and getting involved. And so we really want to make sure that we can get up and running and move to proactive planning as soon as possible. And that's going to be important to us. So then the next 24 to 72 hours, we need to check out and make sure that we have mission cards, get more if needed. That becomes important to us. We can't run out of mission cards for the staff that's coming in. We want to develop and implement the plan to support the workforce. So what kind of orientation, what kind of staff ambassadors, what kind of lodging, are we in hotel rooms, are we in a staff shelter, what's going on? And so really making sure that we're taking care of people. And then workforce sections also looking to plan for incoming staff, and they're setting up those schedules of when we're meeting people, how we're getting them to the disaster relief operation. And then from there, we'll look to initiate our workforce care teams. So the assistant director of workforce, along with the staffing leads, our staff wellness, our mental health, they meet on a regular basis to discuss workforce specific topics and making sure that they're caring for our team as we go through. And that becomes more and more important, especially when we're working virtually. It's important to know how our team is doing when we can't see them necessarily face to face in our traditional manner. So the logistics section. So the logistics section does not establish operational requirements. Instead, it leads the provision, integration, and sustainment of resources to meet operational requirements. Now that's straight from ConOps 3.0. And in that, it's saying that their job is to support, to supply, to make sure that we get what we need to work through that. And so in that first 24 hours, we're going to see a focus on the immediate job. What are our needs? What are our priorities in the next 48 hours? And then it's figuring out what's already been done in the initial phase, what's been ordered, what's taken place, what do we need, what's available in our local warehouse, in a regional warehouse, in a division warehouse, what's going on from here, and how do we look at the size of the operation? Are we going to need offices? Are we going to need warehouses? What are those needs going to look like in terms of facilities for us to look at how we house our operation? And then we have to make sure that we're ready to start receiving stuff, because if people need it, they need it now. They don't need it 7 days from now. And so if it's ordered, we want to be able to get it to them. And so we have to come up with a system in order to bring that in and take it to them. We need to look at the sync. And so we have to sync up with the ambassador program so incoming staff can be received and get to where they're going. That means that we have to make sure that our transportation group is working with the staff services group, and that we're making sure that we're getting our orders and our hotel rooms and all those different things put together to help people out. And we have to get the rest of the logistics structure in order. So how do we track things? How do we report in places as soon as possible? Getting those three-way matches lined up, having people understand how they do their reporting and what paperwork needs to be turned in. Those all become incredibly important to us. Now, in the next 48 hours, we're going to make sure that the workforce has the tools and supplies they need to do their job. We're also going to make sure that our facilities are established. We're going to track any resources. So what are the requests? What are our commitments? What are our loans? Has something been pushed from the dock ahead of time? Did we have someone else order something for us that we didn't anticipate was coming, and now we need to figure out, like, do we need this? What's going on here? Transportation, we manage all the vehicles, everything from our local vehicles to rental cars, rental trucks, national IRVs, trailers, lots of different things are going to come in. And we'll see plans for how we use those rental trucks for material movement. It could be for disaster services technology, or for unsolicited donation management. It could be for procurement. It might be for distribution of emergency supplies. we have to figure out how do we get those initial supplies, office supplies, et cetera, to the right people. And so we have staff working on that. So it might be through in-kind donations or coordination with development in order to coordinate those in-kind donations from some of our key partners and working through those offers and lists. And then our life safety and asset protection for virtual startup support. People getting online, making sure that we understand our current situation. And DST, just what are our assets available, what needs to be obtained? Is that phones? Is it computers? Is it hotspots? What is it that we need in order to do our jobs in our current location? Because in the first, 72 hours, a lot of times we're still waiting for things to get here. And so it becomes really important to figure out what's that next step. So external relations section. So they are going to establish a presence with the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center. They're going to monitor and track government and partner requests. They're going to establish the process for monitoring and emerging issues like what's going on social media, and then they'll be pushing those to our advanced public affairs teams. We'll work with regional executives and executive directors to identify who are the influencers in the community and who are the leaders here that we need to establish and work with strong relationships. We're going to see that we'll connect with regional communication teams and establish two-way communications with the disaster relief operation and what's going on. We'll connect with regional fundraising teams, and once again, looking at that connection and communication that takes place with that. We'll connect with local relationship managers and establish two-way communications with them. So looking at our local emergency response and what that looks like. We'll establish a table of organization and really kind of looking at that span of control and set up a 2-week staffing pattern with mentors in place. So making sure that we can sustain this. And then we'll find out who is already operating out in the field, reaching out to our government partners, reaching out to our non-government partners to see how they've been impacted and how they may or may not be operating. Really trying to leverage things ahead of time. Now, it's important that we say a really good hello to our impacted partners. We want them to know that we're there and that we're here to help. And so that becomes important to us in the long run. And I just would remind you of that over and over again to do that. Now, at the same time, I'm also going to say that one of the things is that sometimes this is a really busy job and we have to delegate work too. And so sometimes when we have all these reports coming in, you might actually have to find someone to be in charge of getting the reports done from the external relations section, because there's so much coming in and so many people moving around that first 24 to 48 hours that we need to make sure that we're getting our reports done. So you might have to assign someone to help with that. Okay, we're almost there. Finance section. So looking at the finance section, their job is to help the response. So do we have enough P cards, purchase cards? Who has those? Are in the right hands? Is there a limit on those P cards? Have they been taken care of so that you can actually charge a hotel room on them? Because if they haven't done that ahead of time, they're not able to charge a hotel room on them. The finance team is going to assist with the initial planning tool. So some finance workers are more involved with that than others, depending on how big the disaster relief operation is, but they should always check your initial planning tool before you turn it in and move to that next level. And they should also are working with us to make sure the accounting string is in place and that people understand how to take care of their charges. The other thing that the finance section is going to do is they're going to help the DRO implement controls as soon as reasonably possible. So what are our limits? What are our delegated authority? Do we have a signature log? Some people are like, oh yeah, we have one of those. How many times have you signed a signature log, 7 days into the disaster relief operation? So we want to try to get those done in that first 48 hours. We're going to move hotel bookings to CLC as soon as possible, especially now because they can't be backed out. And so we need to get those done early. We're going to look at the 6409 process and look how we're doing it electronically, especially with our COVID environment. We're going to look at our 5266, and they're going to be asking questions and making sure it's accurate. We're going to look through our inventory and tracking in its place and all the activities and sites, and really make sure that we're using our agreements and our initial inspections. Those are important to us. But maybe people don't also think about their responsibilities. So our NHQ finance team is going to be working with the finance section every day. They attend the sync calls. They're involved with asking questions. They're asking the disaster relief director questions. And one of the main things they do is they look at brand risk and what is the reputation of the Red Cross and what's going on. So they're going to look at all areas of risk as we work through this. And so those are just a few of the things that we'll see the finance section involved in. So I'm going to pass it back to Terry at this point.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. I think I have a bit of an echo, but never mind. So now you've seen how the sausage is made. It is complicated, as we said at the beginning. And I hope we've given you a good picture of how all of the different ADs and the job director are focusing and what this enormous breadth of activity really is all about. So it is important to understand that the DRO director and the assistant directors focus on planning for, resourcing, and overseeing the conduct of operations. They establish relationships and coordinate internally with government and non-government partners to accomplish our mission, and they care for, fully support a large dynamic workforce. This comes straight out of ConOps. But the thing we want to emphasize is this command staff must delegate. So if you move into one of these positions, you can't be, as Kirsten said to me earlier today, you can't be out in the parking lot unloading the truck. You need to delegate. And another really, really important thing that was mentioned in a couple of the sections for a couple of the presentations for the different sections was use the DRO as an opportunity to mentor and grow new leaders. That's very, very important. So delegation and mentoring new people. Each section depends on all of the others to get the job done. And I hope we've been able to show that, particularly with all of the reporting that needs to end up with information and planning. If any one section fails to report on time, that affects everybody. So I'll finish with reminding you about one of the elements of swarm leadership. And those of you that attended Luke Beckman's talk last week will have seen this. I think it's number 3 in the list of the swarm leadership lessons. Stay in your lane, but help others succeed in theirs, because that's really how this structure works. If everybody understands their role, gets a handle around the things they need to do, but has an eye on helping everybody else, then we work as a team. And with that, I just want to advertise what's next. There'll be 2 sessions, one tomorrow and one on Wednesday, for demystifying the service delivery plan. Having done a couple of these, it looks daunting at first, but actually it's fairly straightforward and logical. And you'll see Carl Matsky, and I'm sorry I've forgotten the name of the other volunteer, but they've put together a really great presentation on how to go through the initial planning tool and then the full service delivery plan. With that, Kirsten and I would be happy to open this up to questions. And as I said at the beginning, Chris Boyle had a big hand in putting this together. So if you do have any questions, you can ask him. So please, any questions, go ahead, put them in the chat or just unmute.
Well, obviously we can see a bit of Dave's sense of humor. I will take the moment, or I mean, of Terry's sense of humor. That is funny. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
This has been obviously a group effort to pull this together, and we showed the list, or Terry showed the list earlier. But Terry and Kirsten, thanks for pulling this together and doing the presentation. One of the things Terry started off with was talking about how it's kind of like setting up a new business overnight. And I think when they pulled a lot of material from all the different doctrines that are out there and different trainings and guidance and whatnot. And the attempt was, to give you an hour, 60 to 90 minutes of just trying to consolidate all of that and show how they interrelate. And so really appreciate that. Some of the conversations that came up earlier in the chat was about, I know, I think it was Nancy asked about, where's REU, reunification. I can't remember who it was now, but they mentioned they got a lot of UDM during one of their fires. Absolutely, totally agree. And we need both of those activities. I just wanted to mention, when we say the initial action is sheltering, it's not only sheltering, but it's also all of the activities that go into pull off sheltering, right? Which includes reunification, it includes UDM, it includes health services and mental health and that. So, don't get too worried about whether or not the activity's on there. The other piece was just that some of the activities aren't on a particular slide that might be representing what's, an example of an org chart. So don't worry about that too much, but yeah, getting a lot of thank yous and whatnot in the chat, you guys. So I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. So anybody who hasn't yet taken ConOps 3, make sure you sign up, because that's how all of this fits together.
No questions. I think that means you guys did amazing.
Yeah, that means an early exit for the cold beer that's waiting for me.
There you go.
Actually, Kirsten offered to talk a little about setting up teams. I posted the document in case anyone missed it. Kirsten then set it up as well. It's only a 4-pager. It's really, really good. But if Kirsten, if you'd like to take over and maybe talk about that now, since you offered to.
I can do that. So we'll just walk through. I'm just going to show my screen just for a second, because I think sometimes people just need a reminder about what is available for them. And so we'll just move over here, bring this up. And so if I come over here on my teams and look at what I have in my group, I'm going to go pull up a disaster relief operation. So it wasn't that big of a disaster relief operation, but you can see right here, it says Disaster Relief Operation 396-20, Boardman, Oregon, and it has general, external relations, finance, logistics, operations, planning, and workforce. So each of those groups had their own files that they were able to keep, and in doing so, we were able to keep track of the disaster relief operation. Now, one of the things that we have found is that people have a hard time finding the meetings, and so I just want to show you the general channel right here is the most important channel that you're going to get to know, because it literally is where all of your meetings are going to come in. So you can see that the staff rosters were posted in here. You'll see that the sit rep and the IAP, but right here, here's an operational teams meeting, a morning briefing. So if you wanted to have that pop on your teams meeting just like normal, like it would, you would hit this button that says view the meeting details. And then when you bring it up, it would give you the chance, or it says cancel the meeting here, it would give you a chance to RSVP for it. And you would just click the RSVP button and it would allow you to join that meeting. And in doing so, it gives you it right on your calendar. So it would show all of the different meetings that you have coming up, and it would automatically go on. Now, if you don't add it on your calendar in that manner, sorry guys. If you don't do it in that manner, it will pop up in the general stream when it's time. So if we had a meeting at 8 o'clock, it would show right here. You have a meeting right now, you should go to it basically. And it would let you just click on it and join now from that location. But the big picture is you can go through and find all your information that you would need in here. Now at the same time, we have files, and in the files in the general stream, it has everything from the closing plans to the staff requests, all different kinds of things that we shared in the group. Any document that was loaded into the general stream automatically comes into the files. So it is a quick place for us to find everything. And the nice thing about this is if someone goes home, it's not attached to their email and you can't find it later. They can still use their regular email, but the job has a copy of everything because it's kept in the team, and the team continues on after it's done. And so that's really a nice piece of the puzzle with that. Then in these different groups, what you can do when you set them up, if you set them up, you can follow the directions that we posted there, but it gives you a chance to manage the team. And when you manage the team, you can go through and see who are the people that were given ownership, and there's specific rules about who has to have ownership and can look inside your team. And then you can go through and see who were your members and your guests. And it lists all the different members. And so if you have a new person come on the disaster relief operation, all you have to do is come over here and say add a member, and you add them in and go from there. And so that's one of the things that we're looking on those staff requests when they come in every morning, is making sure that we have everyone on the team. Now, this makes it really important that our Red Cross staff has a Red Cross email. Now, you might need a job email, which is a little tricky sometimes, but having your Red Cross email will really solve all those problems, because you really can't get into the team's channels unless you have a Red Cross email. And then you'll notice that each of these groups all are put together with a lock on it, because that's just for the people from that group. So we didn't have people from outside external relations getting into external relations. Only external relations could get into that group. Okay. Other things that you might be familiar with, you might like, is you can set up, let me see if I can get this open. And then we'll open up to questions. You can set up tasks that you want to get done. So if I come down here and say, okay, what are some of our completed ones? So we have communication plan that got done under operations. We had some other charts, feeding plan that was waiting to get done. We come over here, we have a planning task that was done that shows the disaster assessment and what we need to have taken care of. And so you can actually have a checklist that's going on to make sure that you have what's taking place and getting done. So there's lots of ways, but I would say the biggest takeaway for me in helping people really get started well on a DRO is to know, where do the meetings populate? And the meetings are going to populate right here in general under the posts, and it will show what meetings coming up. Sorry, it goes too fast. What meetings coming up, and the way to attach that is literally just hitting the 3 little dots and having it join into your calendar, and that will make it really easy. And anytime you use general, if you do @general in here, it will post it, so it will send a reminder to everyone. So, you know, here's the sit rep, here's the incident action plan. Everyone was able to get it. I hit general just so that everyone would have it appear at the same time. So those are just a couple of tips about using Teams on a DRO. It's literally as easy as coming over here and clicking that you want to start a new team. I mean, it is a very easy thing to do. Okay, so what kind of questions do we have at this point? If you remove someone from the access, they do lose access to it. So if someone out processes and you remove them, they will not be able to get back in the folder afterwards. So if you're going to keep someone working virtually afterwards, or they're going to keep doing different jobs, you need to leave them in the team. Other questions? All right, well, can a Teams invite be sent to a telephone number? Yes, the issue though is getting into it sometimes. So typically you can text it to them, but they would have to have the Wi-Fi in order to join the Teams meeting. The files are kept until you remove them from the system. So you have to archive them at this point. I haven't been told a deadline date for how long they're going to leave them live. So at this point, I've seen several groups that have them for 3 to 6 months still live, that they're working through getting things done. At the end, you hit the archive button and it shrinks it down. Every single team site establishes SharePoint sites. So I think a lot of times people are like, oh, I need to set up SharePoint for this too. Don't do that, because literally there is a SharePoint site. If you go to SharePoint, and you will find every one of these. You just have to type in the DR that you're on, and every single channel creates its own SharePoint site. So there is a channel for 396-20 planning, 396-20 logistics. All those things start to exist that way. Anything else? Can you show how to review a file with others and save the draft? I believe I can. So if we come over here, there's a couple different ways to do this. Let's just use a situation report as an example. So on most of our disaster relief operations, we are asking people to type in their situation report on their own, because if they do that themselves, it makes it a lot easier for us in the long run. And you just have to have someone on cleanup on aisle 2 to get the fonts and change the grammar and make it look all pretty. So in this case, if I were to go through on the SharePoint, I can get in here and be working along with a whole bunch of other people. And at the end, it will automatically save it like a Google Doc, big picture. You don't have to hit the save button or anything else on it. You can get out and it will save it. If you make a mistake, you can hit the backwards button right here. That will help you do the undo. But for the most part, you can move through pretty seamlessly to the next line. But you would just get in here, write down what you want. If you want to save a draft, so a couple different things you can do. I have a tendency to say that I like to share things. So if I'm going to save as, I can do a save as, and I typically download a copy when I'm working on something in the end, just so that I feel like I have something saved. You don't have to, but it's just as a safety button for some people. But it automatically saves in the SharePoint for you when you're working on a live document.
Kirsten, this is Terry. I actually have a question about that.
Yeah.
If somebody goes in and deletes something somebody else did, does it keep a track of the history of the document so you can go back to a previous version?
The owner can normally go back, but the everyday Joe is very difficult for them to do.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I always say when you're working on something important, download a copy. Because
Yeah, I always do.
it just saves you in the long run, because obviously we're working with, maybe 10, 15 other people on the same document at the same time. But you can go backwards. The issue is when you go backwards, you have to go through and see what's going on. In a Google document, same as one of these Microsoft documents, you can go through, but if you delete the work of one person, you might, you lose all of the work that they did. And so you have to come back and kind of re-enter that.
Thanks.
Okay. Other questions? All right, well, I'm happy to stay on here and answer questions for everyone. So I think that's what we have for tonight. Thanks everyone for coming and joining us for the